I was nearly 18. I just finished at RADA, and I went for an interview with a producer who said he was in the throes of making a film, and he said, I think there's a part in it that you'd be really good for. Would you read it? So I read this part, and it was for a very sexy, voluptuous barmaid in her 30s, and I thought, God, I don't know, I was flat-chested, very naive. I thought, oh, this is going to be quite a character part, and I read it, and he said, I think you'd be very good in this, but what we've got to do, we've got to have the director meet you to say whether you do it or not, and tonight we're night shooting in Marylebone Shunting Yard, so could you be there at 11 o'clock, because we're shooting all night. You can meet the director, and if he says yes, the part is yours. So I just left RADA, and I thought, oh my God, this is my break, and everything. So I go along to Marylebone Shunting Yard. It's pouring with rain, dismal day, and the director comes by and says hello and walks by, and I thought, gosh, I didn't create much of an impression there, and I'm standing there not knowing what to do. And there's a young actor who is committing suicide in front of an oncoming train, and it was such a cheap production. They didn't have a stand-in or a stuntman or anything, and it was quite a precarious shot to be doing, and the actor was Brian. So they finally get this shot, nerve-wrackingly. The train went so close to him, and he climbed back onto the platform, and he said, oh, what's your name? So I said, Nanette Newman. And he said, well, I'm Brian Forbes. So I said, oh, Mr. Forbes, I thought you were terrific in that scene. I thought it looked so dangerous and you were so good. And actually, Mr. Forbes, there's a chance I might be in your film. So he said, really? So I said, yes, I've got to, try and meet the director and talk to him, because I think that there's a part, a very small part that I might play. So there was a pause, and he said, I'm sorry I've got to be the one to tell you this, but this is the last night of shooting. The part has already been played, and I think you're here under rather dodgy circumstances. So of course I was pretty amazed. It was now midnight, raining, and I'd got to get back to Streatham where I lived. And so he said, look, I tell you what I'll do. I'll go and get changed, and then I'll take you home, because you'll be safe with me. And I wasn't, of course. I was with him the next. We were then together forever. But that's how I met him. It was curious, and obviously it was a pretty dreadful film, but I always remember it happily, because it's where I met the person I spent, all those years with. We'd both done a lot of things. Brian had done much more than me, because Brian was a writer. He wrote novels, he wrote scripts, and he was quite established as an actor. I was becoming reasonably established as an actress, and we'd both done quite a lot of things. And then Brian was running Elstree Studios. He'd become head of production, and he was making lots of films like The Railway Children, The Go-Between. He was producing and working very hard to get the studio on its feet and do really, really good productions. But he missed directing. He loved directing. And so when this subject came his way, I can't remember how or who brought it to him, he thought, I really would love to direct this film. It's a small, intimate, interesting film that I would love to direct myself. And of course the people at the studio were not too keen for him to direct, because he was, head of production. But he managed to talk them into letting him do it, and said, I will do it on such a tiny budget. I will make it very quickly, but I passionately want to do it. So he wrote the script and cast Malcolm McDowell, who then was such an exciting person in the industry, because Clockwork Orange, and he was somebody new and dynamic, and he was thrilled to get Malcolm. And then he asked me if I would play the girl in it. And it was an interesting film to do, because it cost, I think, it was under 100,000 to make. Now you couldn't even do a morning shoot on a film now. They're all millions and millions of pounds. And everybody took a cut. The cameraman, a new cameraman called Tony Emmy, who so wanted to work with Brian, Malcolm and I took cuts in our salary. Everybody, you know, joined forces and wanted to do this very small film because they thought it was such an interesting, unusual subject. And so that was how it came about. And I think it's interesting to remember that at that time, which is a long, long time ago, films weren't as realistic. You know, we were getting films from Italy and France, which were very realistic subjects. And in England, we were in a bit of a rut. It was, you know, very often the dialogue was very stilted. They were very films that we'd been making for many, many years in the same way. And I think Brian wanted to break new ground and do a subject which was a very tricky subject about people who were disabled and who were in wheelchairs. So it was a difficult choice, but one that appealed to Brian, and of course it was a love story, which Brian always loved, making love stories.
Good book?
Not bad. Bit dull.
Why are you reading it then?
I don't know. Once I begin a book, I always think I've got to finish it.
That's a bloody silly rule for a start-off. Depressing, isn't it? All these people sitting around here in wheelchairs. What's your name?
Jill.
Jill what?
Jill Matthews.
I'm Bruce Pritchard. I expect you're glad to meet me at last. Are you glad to meet me?
Yes.
You don't sound very sure.
Should I be?
I was only trying to make conversation, you know. I've pulled better than you.
From my point of view, it was a lovely part to play, and I think the thing was that Brian's ability to write realistic dialogue and to take a subject that was difficult and do something new was always very exciting. And at that time, a lot of films were shot in the studio. People weren't using locations a great deal. I mean, the number of films that you see now from that era where you're in the jungle, but you're in Pinewood Studios, you know, it was a kind of curious. People didn't go on locations a great deal. And we shot that film in an empty house and didn't do anything in the studio and created the home in the house, and it had an air of reality about it, which was perhaps at that time lacking, not in all films, but in a lot of films.
Hello, Mr. Pritchard, isn't it? Bruce Pritchard?
Yes, that's right.
Well, you made good time. Matron's waiting. I'll show you the way. I'm Bill Charles, by the way.
Nice place, isn't it?
I think every part is a challenge, really, and every part that you play it has something different that challenges you, hopefully, because that's what makes it interesting. And obviously, in this instance, Malcolm and I were in wheelchairs, which just limited movement, that's all. But once you got used to using a wheelchair, you know, it was just part and parcel of that character.
Doctors say 5 fingers on the hand is almost impossible to cure.
Oh, they get it from shaking, you know.
Still, they all look terribly cheerful.
Oh, yes. Some of them are very brave. Imagine going through life on legs.
Yes, and you'd be surprised how clever they are on those legs once they get used to them. You know, some of them even dance.
How fascinating. Do you think they'll dance for us?
Oh, no. They only do that on special occasions. They have to have injections first.
What kind of injections?
They inject them with gin.
Malcolm and I went to Stoke Mandeville before we started the film and met a lot of people who were in wheelchairs, and in fact we had two, a young man and a young woman who were both in wheelchairs, who were technical advisors on the film, so that we didn't do anything silly. But there's not an awful lot you can, the scenes have to be constructed within the the confines of being in a wheelchair, but you get used to that very quickly.
Hey, I've won a prize. Which one would you like?
Oh, could I have her? She's sweet.
I loved working with Malcolm. He was funny, he was a wonderful actor, and I haven't seen the film for a long time, but I remember at the time thinking he had the ability to be totally and utterly real and natural. And as somebody to work with, he was terrific.
Really, going to go with the colour there. Mind you, if we put a white cushion there, it might sort of bring it up, do you think?
Yes.
And Mother thinks we ought to get a place a bit nearer her. Who's that?
The latest arrival.
Looks a bit different from the rest.
One of the funny things I remember was there was one scene where the character Malcolm played had asked me to marry him, and we were doing a shot in Canterbury, in the High Street in Canterbury, and he'd bought my character an engagement ring, and Brian wanted us to come out of the shop where we'd bought the jewellers laughing and very happy, and we'd got the ring, and then we go to the level crossing and we cross the road. Brian was on the other side of the road with the camera and the crew, and we were waiting for the light because it was a really appalling day and the light kept going. So Brian, we were listening to Brian, and Brian would say, in a minute, I'll say action. We're just waiting for the cloud to go, or whatever. And it was freezing. And Malcolm and I were outside the shop, and we suddenly saw we were in Canterbury, and we suddenly saw the Bishop of Canterbury was walking down the main street, and Malcolm, who has a terrible bad taste, sense of humour, threw off the rug off his wheelchair, and he said, "Oh my God, it's a miracle I can walk," and staggered down the street, setting me off into terrible hysterics. And the Bishop of Canterbury just walked by. He looked and he sort of went, "Oh my God," and walked on. And I don't know why. Is it funny now? I don't know. At the time we thought it was hysterical, and Malcolm was walking, so he did a lot of, I'm sure, in retrospect, quite silly things. I'm sure the Archbishop of Canterbury thought it was a bit odd, but didn't look to see if it was a miracle and just walked on.
I understand from the vicar that you haven't been inside our church since you arrived here.
Well, I dare say we shall see him admitted to the kingdom of heaven in the end, Mr. Ladbury.
Oh, no, not me. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 1. And I quote, "He whose testicles are crushed or whose male member is cut off shall not enter the assembly of the Lord." That's me, ladies and gentlemen. You see, madam, I've still got my works, but I can't do anything with them. The engine's all right, but the wheels won't go round. When Brian was head of EMI, they obviously didn't want him to direct at the same time as being head of the studio, because I think they felt that he couldn't do the two things. And believe me, very difficult to do those two things, but he was so passionate about this subject. So there were a lot of problems, and they finally got them ironed out, because Brian said, "I'm going to make it on a shoestring. Nothing will be neglected. I'll still do everything else," which meant it was like a 24-hour-a-day job. But that worked out okay in the end. But there was a lot of people within the company who said he shouldn't direct. But
it was difficult for him because he enjoyed being the head of production, but he didn't want to totally give up his career as a director. Being directed by your husband, people either really like it or really hate it. There's no in between, and I really loved it because I knew that Brian always wanted me to be the best I could be. I thought he was a wonderful director, and he seemed to be able to give me confidence. I was never a very confident person, but he was able to give me confidence and also help me to experiment and stretch myself as an actress. So I loved working with him. I think the film was groundbreaking. Nobody had made a film about people with disabilities. And I think if you remember that time that it was made, people had got to come a long way to help people who were in wheelchairs or who had physical problems in that way. And I think to do a subject where the two main characters, the two lovers, are in wheelchairs, it was a very unusual subject, and a lot of people were against Brian making it, and I think it was interesting because it broke a lot of new ground. It broke a lot of taboos. I mean, today things have moved on, and we don't have, for instance, in those days, people's houses weren't adjusted for people who had disabilities. They very often had to go into a place, as you see in the film, where they live in a home because the people at home perhaps couldn't cope with the disability. That doesn't happen today. Everything has moved on so much, but at that time it depicted the lives of those people, and I think it did break new ground, really. It was very exciting that it had such incredible reviews, and it won lots of awards and things. I know awards are not important, but you know, actors by and large in their career, they take a lot of stick because you make a film that you think, oh, this is it, this is going to be the highlight of my career, and the critics smash it and say you're dreadful, the film is dreadful, you can't act, or whatever it is. We all go through that. And so therefore, on the occasions where somebody gives you a pat on the back, or they say well done, or you get an award, or you get good notices, it's lovely. I don't believe people who say they don't care and they don't read the notices. Of course you do. You know, you once a film is out there, it's lovely to think that other people have enjoyed it, and we were lucky with that because of the things Brian was doing with the studio, and there'd been a lot of publicity about trying to make different films, different subjects, difficult subjects, all sorts of things. It was very rewarding for him that it was so well received.